Davis steps under center. Gibson and McClendon behind him. Davis with motion by Richard. Will give the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh, he doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolfolk again. Wolfolk the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolfolk to midfield. Myles Wolfolk with the pick. The heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory.
Left side of the line. Hood standing to Williams' right. Williams gonna throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio is at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me? Connor Barth for the possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Connor Barth. Good gosh, dirty!
This is the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast on a Monday after a bye week that wasn't originally scheduled. That is why I currently look like a caveman, although I am going to go and get that cleaned up before our next game on October 3rd. Unfortunately, it appears that Carolina will have to wait until October 3rd to play their next game. So this is going to be a shorter edition of the podcast than the ones we've had in the last few weeks. It really stinks. This team got themselves going. We thought, okay, they're going to be able to get into a rhythm. They played Charlotte. I was not a big proponent of the early bye as it was.
Yeah.
Then you end up getting the game against Charlotte canceled. Again, very understandable why they had to cancel. Nobody is saying that they shouldn't have canceled or anything like that. But it really stinks, especially for a team that we felt, even though they didn't perform great in the first half against Syracuse, took some steps in the right direction, and we were hoping would be able to correct some of the issues that we saw in that first game sometime before they had to go on the road to Chestnut Hill.
Yeah, it really stinks because you don't get a chance to get into an early season rhythm or none of that stuff. And like you said, you're not getting a chance right now to build on what you did in the game. You can work on it in practice, but it's just practice. You don't really know until you're back out playing someone else. Have you improved in the areas where you got to improve? So, you got to commend the football program. They tried their best to find this opponent. It wasn't like they were just waiting to see if something happened. They were calling schools and teams to try to get them to come to Chapel Hill, but it just didn't work out. And, now you got almost a 3-week break in between games, and you got a chance to get somewhat a little bit more healthy. Maybe, there should be no reason why Azudu isn't back, but you're kind of back where you were leading up to the Syracuse game, where you're kind of back in preseason mode, just gearing up for a game that's still over 2 weeks away.
Yeah, and I think for the team, they've kind of got to just, I'm not going to say get back into that preseason mode, because there are some things that you can go off of that's always extremely helpful. You've had some contact against somebody else. It's, instead of just yourself in a full contact scrimmage. So I think there's some things that you can use, you can build on, but ultimately, it's almost kind of like you're playing a first game of the season. And, when you look ahead, just, on the surface, that Boston College game, I think it's definitely a tough matchup, but still, if you look at it compared to some of the other teams that they have after them, Virginia Tech, Florida State, I think that's probably one of the better draws that you could hope for in this type of a season if you had to do that, which this might not, unfortunately, be the only time that we may have to even do that this year.
Yeah, because we're sitting here right now, and it's September 21st, and there's a good chance that they may not even play Virginia Tech the week after you play Boston College. That's a legitimate possibility.
So can we have this conversation? Because I'm being serious about this, and I know that we're supposed to, sort of take the caring approach and everything like that. I think that at this point, is it not in the thoughts of some people around the ACC that we need to kick them out for the rest of the season. Because at this point,
they may have to just do that themselves.
At this point, they are almost not going to be you're going to miss the first 4 or 5 weeks of your season at this point because you don't have enough players. Look, we don't know the situation. We don't know if it was the fact that they just didn't do what they were supposed to in terms of quarantine, if there was somebody that got, that somehow got inside the program that had it, whatever. But at this point, I think we've got to have a serious conversation that right now, this team it does not look like they're on pace at all to play this season. And if they have to sit out, I think, it stinks. It definitely hurts the conference a little bit considering they were a team you thought could be competitive for your conference championship. But at a certain point, you've got to say to yourself, how much longer can we keep extending them before, we're going to have to say, look, we don't think you're going to be able to make up these games in time.
Yeah, for Carolina, if they were to go ahead and cancel their season, that takes probably your biggest threat up until Notre Dame off the schedule. Mm-hmm. And really, that's what you got to look at it for all these schools that have already postponed games of Virginia Tech, and for those of us who are waiting to play. If we're not going to play them, we need to know sooner than later so we can try to fill that game void.
Right.
We don't want to get in this situation again where whether it's the week over the week before, they're not ready to play because of the COVID-19 pandemic within their program, and then you're down to another game because the lesser and lesser games you play, you're going to be hard-pressed to justify having an argument to make the college football playoff or to compete for an ACC championship if you only played in 7 or 8 games. So it needs to get resolved. Maybe the ACC will step in, but they're being cautious. But caution is also going to cost a lot of money and some other schools some games.
Yeah, and I understand that. And again, I think the biggest thing is that you just kind of wonder what is happening. That we saw it with. Even, Carolina early when they got back into practice had a small outbreak. They got it under control. ECU's had a small outbreak. They've seemed to have gotten it under control. Look like they'll be on pace to play at some point. Same thing with NC State. Yep. They had one. They were back on the field this past weekend. I'm just wondering what is different at Virginia Tech where we're hearing that, the way that Fuente is talking, it's going to be a while before we're going to see them have a full group of guys out there. I'm just wondering what is going on there and why things are as bad as they are at the moment.
It really just shows the lack of leadership led by him within his program, that he can't get his guys to do what he's asking them to do.
Right.
I think that's what it falls on, his leadership ability to get his team to follow him and listen to what they're doing. And some of us, the kids, are being irresponsible, but they're in college, so you can almost understand it to a certain degree.
Right.
But ultimately, it's Fuente's program. It is his fault.
Yeah, and the other thing is of course, anybody that is sick on the team, we, of course, are hoping the best for them. We are hoping that they're going to be able to get back on the field, but I think it is a serious conversation that you have to have at some point. Now, unfortunately, it looks like Carolina won't get an opponent for this week. There were some interesting names that were thrown out on the table as teams that were free agents. One that we immediately struck off the table, somebody suggested go with another ACC opponent, but don't count it as an ACC game. They said, why don't we play Clemson? Yeah, why not? I'm not going to. No. I think that is one of the worst ideas possible right now. Clemson, first of all, preparing for Clemson while knowing that you're eventually going to have them on your schedule is hard enough.
Yeah.
Preparing for them on a short week, not knowing that you were going to have to play them would be brutal, and they are on fire right now. Some of the other options that were out there, Western Kentucky, I know, is one of the teams. Marshall, who, they've looked really good so far. That might be one of those kind of games that could be a trap game. Air Force, another one that I said I really would prefer not to play them. Middle Tennessee was on there, but they found a game for this week. So, everything just kind of wasn't able to fall into place for Carolina. But, I know if you had to pick a game, who was the one that you were maybe eyeing out of the group that we were looking at?
I think Navy would have been interesting for a lot of different reasons. You get to bring in a military service academy, so that's cool. You get to prepare, or you get to go up against a triple option, which you no longer have to do with Georgia Tech move into a more modern offense. Mm-hmm. So that might have been and you can figure out really how good you are being in run defense, because you looked really, really good against Syracuse, but
right.
Everyone looks good against Syracuse right now because that's not a good football team.
Well, their backfield also is not strong, with both Abdul Adams and Jarvion Howard dropping out for the season. So, yeah,
I think that would have been the reason why, if you were to play Navy, and you could slow their run game down, you would probably take more into that as opposed to what you got against Syracuse. And you'd probably feel a little bit different and a little more confident in this defense to be more consistently good throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, I think it could have been interesting. I think, Navy definitely looked good in the second half the other day against Tulane. Not so good in the first half, so I think that definitely could have been interesting. Was one of the ones that I had a little bit higher on my list. Also, would have loved to see Coastal Carolina come to Chapel Hill. Of course, they play down in Myrtle Beach, so it wouldn't have been too far of a drive for them. A team that is in the Sun Belt, so would have definitely benefited from coming to Carolina, getting that paycheck, and really would have been cool seeing Sam Howell and Grayson McCall go head-to-head because they went head-to-head in high school. They used to battle for the rights in Indian Trail, the bragging rights in Indian Trail between Sun Valley and Porter Ridge. That would have been pretty cool to see those two match up again, but unfortunately it looks like we are going to have to wait and see what we can do on October 3rd. Now, one of the big storylines going into this, and one of the other reasons why maybe it's a positive or negative, however you look at it, that Carolina is going to have to wait until then, is they are going to have to replace one of their biggest defensive players. This broke right after, believe it or not, isn't that always how it happens with the podcast, by the way?
Yeah.
The big news always breaks the minute that we get off and start, saving stuff, sending it to ourselves, and preparing to get the video uploaded. This past time, Myles Wolfolk, the starting safety for the Tar Heels, who we were talking about, had a really good game on Saturday. Unfortunately, he has been deemed academically ineligible for the rest of the year. Being that he is a grad student as well, he will not be able to return next year. So we have seen the last of Myles Wolfolk in a Tar Heel uniform. Of course, we remember last season the start that he got off to, the 2 interceptions in the game against South Carolina, had 3 in the first 3 games before, of course, going down with a season-ending injury. And that, unfortunately was one of the things that kind of defined his career at Carolina were injuries. But when he was on the field, a very productive part of this team and one that's going to be tough to replace.
Yeah, I mean, you've already lost a lot of guys in the secondary due to sitting out for COVID, and then you lose a guy that was a veteran leadership, was a productive player on the field, and wasn't responsible enough in the classroom. And so that's where this sucks because, that's on the kids to make sure they're doing the classwork and making the grades, and it's going to be a challenge for Carolina to replace him as opposed to some of the other guys that you lost already. So you'll see what Dre Bly can do. He's done a good job piecing together last year through all the injuries. Well, now you've got to go through that again with the secondary group, so you'll see how the defensive backfield holds up. But as of right now, it's a big loss.
Yeah, and the other thing, you got to say this about Myles Wolfolk. This is a guy that has graduated with, I believe, 2 degrees, if I saw that right. So, again, he is a college student. We all have those moments in life where we slip up, especially during this time. It's a very different environment and with the all online classes and everything like that. So, again, it is definitely something that, you got to sort of understand. It's a moment where he slipped up and made a mistake, and unfortunately for him, it cost him the remainder of his career. I'd like to see him be able to get a chance in the NFL. Don't know if that's going to ultimately end up happening. We'll just have to wait and see for that. But in terms of how Carolina replaces him, look, Don Chapman, I think, is sealed in at that free safety spot. He looked great the other day, so I'm not really that concerned, and I'm not concerned with the rest of the secondary being able to sort of pick up the slack and try to help minimize how much that strong safety spot has to be used in order for the team to have success, especially in coverage. I think in the box, that's where they're going to have to be concerned because that's where Myles Wolfolk was maybe a little bit better than some of the other guys in this area. But, you look at the guy that took over for him last year. That's the favorite now to step into his position. Cameron Kelly came in last year after he got injured against App State, started the game against Clemson, looked good in that game until, of course, injuring his knee, tearing his ACL, lost for the rest of the season on a tackle against Clemson quarterback Trevor Lawrence. But, I think even though there is some growing concern here with how many guys are leaving the secondary, I still feel like there are some solid options in here led by Cameron Kelly.
Well, there's a lot of talent in that secondary group, so that's why you feel okay, and you know what you can get from Cameron Kelly if he can, in fact, stay healthy. That's going to be the really question about him is, does he stay healthy through the year? And if so, you feel like him and Dom Chapman can work together back there in the secondary to minimize the loss of Wolfolk. And, like you said, the bigger concern is what happens down in the box. Can they replace his ability to be a help in the run defense? Because if not, maybe you're a little bit more worrisome, but I feel like that won't be a problem for this defense.
I think there's a couple of options there, too. I mean, we talked about Kelly. Another guy that I think fits the position really well and I think could definitely get a look there is Jaquarius Conley, who came out of Northside High School in Jacksonville. That was what he did there. He was a guy that played in the box a lot. He can fly around, good sideline-to-sideline ability, as well as the good coverage ability. I think they might give him a shot there. I think, another guy, Giovanni Biggers, who we saw, heard he had a big camp. Mac Brown and his
bigger role now
was just, oh my God, we got to find a replacement co-host. Anybody with the resume, please submit. But yeah, I mean, I think he showed some good things. Had his first career interception. I mean, granted, it was in garbage time, but there's a reason that he was listed as the backup to Don Chapman at free safety. And then another one that's interesting. I don't think it's going to get as much talk, but remember that we heard Trey Morrison was moving around the entire secondary.
I think that's an emergency move, though, if he's got to go back there.
Right. But, I mean, look, if you really feel that concerned and he showed you enough, you could move him back there and you would think it's going to be easier to find someone in the nickel because the nickel spot is always a place where you can put younger guys and let them grow. The responsibilities aren't as big. You don't have to be as good of a tackler. You still got to be a good tackler because you're trying to help seal the edge, but you don't have to be as good of a tackler as if you're playing strong safety where you're playing in the middle in the box. I think it's going to be interesting, though. I think Carolina's going to probably use a platoon of guys. Yeah. I think Kelly will probably be your main guy, but I'm really interested. I think Conley is going to get a good look there, and I'm going to be interested to see how they end up filling that void in that game against Boston College, where they're going to be tested right out of the gate against a team that, as we know from watching them in the past, is going to want to run the ball a lot.
Yeah, nope, I totally agree with everything you just said about what Jaquarius Conley can do. Giovanni Biggers is going to have a much larger role now moving forward. Now that the injury is
there you go. That's right. Now leave the puns out of it.
With Wolfolk gone, and I just feel like if you move Trey Morrison there, that's because you just don't trust the other guys to get the job done. You don't want to move him out of the nickel unless you absolutely have to. Mm-hmm. So that'll be a desperate move at the defense at that time. That's my opinion, though.
No, I mean, it's a legitimate opinion. I feel you on that, and I think, the good thing is even if they did have to move them, there's still a lot of depth. I think that's the biggest thing about this secondary. Look at all the guys that they've lost, whether it's been to opt-out, it's been to, ineligibility, it's been to transfer. This group is still probably in the top 3 or 4 deepest on the entire team. Yeah. So it's not something to be overly concerned about. It's worth noting. It's something that is going to be worth keeping an eye on and could become a concern. But I think out of the gate here, in these first couple of games, because even against Virginia Tech, I don't think Virginia Tech, with Hendon Hooker, I don't think they're going to be a team that's going to be throwing the ball around the yard
you don't imagine so.
A bunch of times. So you're going to have to find that guy that's going to be able to come up into the box and help you. I think that's probably an easier ask than finding somebody that is ready and willing to help in coverage because there's just a lot more technical things that go on there. But, I think, as of right now, Carolina still feels confident going into that game against Boston College. The good performance from the Eagles in the game against Duke, I think that was probably a little bigger of a win than we thought. I think we thought Duke would probably hang around in that game, especially after the way they played against Notre Dame. But it also looks like the Eagles have their quarterback in Notre Dame transfer Phil Jerkovich. Yep. So we're going to have to see. We're going to have to see how Carolina can sort of adjust themselves as well, if they're able to fight through some of the adversity in an environment that we don't know what we're heading into. Again, we have no idea if there are going to be fans there or anything because I don't think they've really mentioned if they're going to have fans this preseason. You would maybe imagine so because they're in Massachusetts. That's one of the areas where they've really done a good job of taking care of the coronavirus up there. So there could be a little environment. But again, as you said, you're going up there in October. That's huge as opposed to going up there in November like they were supposed to. So I think Carolina's got a real chance to go up there and get a win. So that's going to finish it for this edition of the podcast. Make sure you guys go back, check out the other editions of the podcast. The most recent edition before this is Caleb Downs' interview. Make sure you guys go and check that one out. That's a great one. We got to talk to the 2023 safety who is just going to be a stud in that class. He is a fantastic guy. Boy, we wish we could have him able to sort of get into that rotation at that strong safety position because he fits that position so well. Go back, check out that interview as well as some of the other editions of the podcast. Even the Syracuse recap, still kind of relevant now. You can go back, listen to that game as we break down how Carolina performed in that first game. Of course, you could probably skip the part about the Charlotte cancellation because we were saying that there was a chance that potentially Carolina could lock down an opponent, but it looks like that is not going to be able to happen. As for the website, some great stuff on there, HeelToughBlog.com. Make sure you guys go in there, check out all of the latest stuff on there that we've got for you guys. Of course, we've been walking you through this off week here. We are going to sort of have you guys covered with any of the news that's going on. We're trying to get an update on Joshua Zudu. Of course, the article up there discussing Myles Wolfolk's academic ineligibility. We go a little more in-depth on the guys that are going to be the options to replace him. So make sure you guys go and read that, as well as go back, check out that Syracuse recap. We still got that up there. That's still relevant at this point. Trench report as well as the stock report. Nothing's going to really change between now and then because we just don't have a lot of information, especially this year in the COVID world where there just aren't as many people that are allowed to be around the team. So we don't really have a ton of information as of right now. But whenever we do, we'll have all the articles for you, all the information that you need on HeelToughBlog.com. Before we go, last thing we'll ask you to do, if you're watching this edition of the podcast, make sure you like the Facebook page so that whenever we start to go live, whenever we put up a premiere video, you guys will get a notification so you don't miss any edition of the podcast. For the people listening on the podcast app, whichever one you are listening on, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that you can do that. Make sure you guys do that for us. We'd really appreciate that. Of course, we love you guys being able to communicate with us. The other thing kind of moves us up those rating boards so people that haven't found the show yet can track it down. So once again, we want to thank you guys for watching and listening to this edition of the podcast. And as always, go Tar Heels.